Hi everyone, welcome to another Fairy Tale Fierce Fight video. Now in today's video I'm going to do a quick guide on Battle of Underworld King and just kind of show you the strategy I use to get high points in this game mode. Now currently I am rank 1 in my server. I have like 5.4 mil, so I have like 400k extra points than anyone else in my server. Now having said that, I'm only at gold rank because I did miss out on promotion for 1 week. Um, However, even if you take into account of the fact 15 people get promoted every single week, so I will still be like the 16th strongest in my server. So that's still very good for free to play. So I do think my strategy definitely work, and I'm going to share with you guys how to achieve that. And also, I'm recording this on the Sunday, so I hopefully everyone else in my server have already done off their attempt, and this is the highest score they are gonna do. So that hopefully, fingers crossed, I will end this week actually being rank 1. But let's see how it goes. Now, what I'm gonna do in this video is I'm gonna first talk about the characters you want to use for each one of those teams, and then in the second half of this video, I'm gonna show you a clip of an actual battle, so you guys know exactly what to do when you're in the battle itself. Now, if we just take a look at the teams that you need for this game mode, basically you need to fill in 6 teams. So there's power, wisdom, agility, versatility. Those 4 are always going to be fixed. Then there's also the last one, the no deployment condition. That's always going to be the same as well, where basically means you can play whichever character you want. Now this one, the fifth one, or the fourth one, depending on how you read it. This one, I believe it rotates between magical with physical. So depending on your box, you may do slightly better for 1 week compared to another. So for example, take me for example, I have hardly any good magical units. But before Luxus is released, my best magical unit is like Juvia and Wendy, and one's a healer, one's a debuffer, supporter. So none of them is like DPS. So the week when it was magical, that's the week I missed out on promotion, unfortunately. But for the physical week, all of a sudden, I'm rank 1. So that basically just shows, depending on your box, you may tend to get a very different swing of scores depending on whether you are actually having someone good for both physical and also for magical teams. Now, even though you can see for every single team, I filled in completely with 3 characters, in reality, I'm only using 1 character every single time. And that is very important because basically, especially for free to play, because the idea here is that you only want 1 set of good equipment or magic stones so that you can then swap them around to different characters to maximize their damage. So rather than you having to train up, potentially 6 characters or 18 characters to deal the highest amount of damage possible, you just only have 1 set of magic stones and you just swap it around on whoever you're going to use. Yes, it's a bit more tedious. You do need to swap it around rather than just go straight into the battle. But I do feel like for free to play, that's the best use of resources. So you concentrate a lot more on something that you can share in common between your characters rather than spend the same amount of resources on everyone. So that's kind of the one tip I will give you guys in order to receive or dish out very high damage here, is that have 1 set of magical gear or stones and then just swap it around. For example, for power, I will be using Gargel, and then I'll have that set on Gargel, and then for wisdom, I'll be using Juvia. Therefore, I just transfer all of my magic stone from Gargel to Juvia and do my attack there. And that's basically how you repeat the process and still have a very high score on all of them without training up every character to the max. Now, yeah, so anyway, so like I said, even though there are 3 characters on each team, you only have 1 character doing all the damage the whole time. The only exception is going to be if your character doesn't have very good leadership skill and you have someone else in your team with a much better leadership skill or more offensive leadership skill. So for the example I'm going to give is going to be agility. Evergreen's a character I use for agility. Her leadership skill got nothing to do with damage. Whereas Urza actually have a really good leadership skill, which reduces your skill cooldown time. So what I do for agility is that even though my DPS, the one doing damage, is going to be evergreen, I'll start off the battle with Urza being set as the leader, and then as soon as I go into battle, I'll switch into evergreen for the entire period of the battle. So that's basically what you want to do when your character doesn't actually have very good leadership skill or very offensive leadership skill. Now, in terms of the actual characters you want to use for each of the teams, For power, you should have plenty of choices here. Like Gajo and Natsu do insane amount of damage. They're like glass cannon, but they do insane amount of damage. And survivability is not that big an issue in Battle of Underworld anyway, because you can very easily dodge the attacks. And for the first wave, when it's the minions, you should be able to one-shot them if your damage is high enough. Midnight is also very good, and Macro is okay as well. The problem with those is that because they're SSR, it kind of depends on what you are able to 4-star them in order to unlock their 4 skill. That's going to be a massive difference in terms of how much damage you can dish out. So if you do not have them max out with, not max out, will unlock their 4 skill or their ultimate skill, then maybe Gajo and Natsu would do better for you. I definitely recommend you have Gajo and Natsu both trained up for Battle of Underworld anyway, because one of them you'll be using for the power team, and another one very likely you'll be using it for the one which no requirement or no restrictions given, or for the physical weeks you'll be using them for the physical team as well. So it's not a bad idea to try and both Gajo and Natsu for this game, and also Midnight with Macro if you happen to have them at 4-star with all of their skills unlocked. Agility is a bit of a tough one. I think the best character for agility is going to be Ikaruga. If you decided to summon on her, that is. For me, because I missed out on her, well, I chose not to summon on her, I don't really have any good DPS. The best DPS outside of Ikaruga, I believe, is going to be Totemaru, because damage over time in this game do stack up quite high. So I think Totemaru is probably the best choice for agility. I just didn't want to train up Totemaru purely for the sake of Battle of Underworld though, so that's kind of why I chose not to use Totemaru. Like if you are lacking a fire character, then yeah, you can use Totemaru, but I am already using Natsu for early game, and now I'm using Razor for end game, and I just don't see the need of having another fire character to train up. It costs a lot of resource, so I didn't bother. But Totemaru should be the second best DPS for agility faction. The one I am using personally right now is Evergreen, purely because I leveled her up when we have that event when she was first added to the game. There was that event where you get diamonds back for leveling her up, so I can just use I use some resource on Evergreen there to get my Evergreen to like top 200 or top 300 in the server to get a few diamonds back. So that's pretty much it, and that's kind of why I'm using Evergreen, purely because she's the most trained up out of them. Leon is also a very good choice because he's a very good end game. The same with Leon is that he's more of a debuffer, and one of his skill is like a shield, which doesn't do damage. So even though Leon is a very good character for endgame, he's not a very good character for Battle of Underworld. So that's something you have to bear in mind here. But yeah, agility, definitely Ikaruga if you have her. Otherwise, Totemaru is the best choice, or just whoever you have that happen to be leveled up in this faction. Then for wisdom, best choice in future, I believe it's going to be Angel and Jose, because both of them summon something onto the field to do damage for you. So Angel can summon a copy of one of your teammates, and Jose can summon like an energy ball, and both of them do damage. So they're definitely the best choices. Cobra is also a very good choice for like pure damage as well. He has really high damage output, but obviously depending on whether you have him. I don't have him, for example, and also even if you have him, you kind of want him to be 4-star to have all 4 skills unlocked to do that high amount of damage. Now, if you're like me and you don't have any of those, the best character early on would be Eriga. Eriga is probably the most DPS heavy. However, end game, by end game I mean once you have 6-star unlock, Gray is going to be the best one because basically if you look at Gray's skill, he has this passive, which basically says whenever his HP decreased by 15%, he get extra 5% damage. The problem with this is that because Battle of Underworld is fairly easy and you don't really take much damage, it's really hard to trigger this when Gray is not 6-star. However, once Gray is 6-star and you unlock his additional passive, you can then trigger this without any HP threshold, and that basically means Gray is like one of the best DPS for Wisdom faction once you have him at 6-star or higher to unlock that additional passive. But before that, I think Erigo is going to be the best DPS. Or if you're like me and you don't have either of them trained up and you don't want to train up them, then Juvia is the one I'm currently using, and she's okay as a choice as well because she does have 2 debuff, which actually reduce enemy defense and like for you to more like a to crit. So even though she is more like a supporter unit by default, because at least she can debuff the enemy for you to do more damage, she's actually okay in this wisdom faction. But yeah, ideally you probably want, Cobra Angel or Jose when they're actually in the game, or Eragor for now, or Grey eventually once you have him at 6 star. So that's what you want to use for wisdom. Then for versatility, best choice is definitely going to be Heaven's Will Urza, like for sure, because you can stack up this and then you get like 20 stack extra damage. Granted, it's only going to be towards the second half of the game, but because of Battle of Underworld, it's actually one mode where you have two halves. That actually basically means you can use the first half to stack up of your pentagram, and then the second half you already have all those damage bonus. So that's actually going to be very good for Urza. So Urza is definitely the best character. But if you're free to play like me, what you can do is someone like Luxus, or maybe even Brain. I think Brain is going to be decent. I haven't tested him, but I know he can do a lot of damage. I think the only tricky thing for him is that when he's using his move, he can't move around either. So I don't know whether he is going to be okay in this game mode because it does kind of require you to run around to collect some extra buff as well. So I think Brain can potentially do okay. You just need to time when you use that attack quite carefully to make sure it's still run around and collect the buff when they are about to expire. I'll show you what I mean when I actually talk through the clip of how I have done it, so you know a bit more there. But yeah, if you don't have Brain or Heaven's Word Urza, well, actually no, after Heaven's Word Urza, the best character is going to be Luxus. Luxus is like an insanely frail glass cannon, so he is very easy to take damage, but he deal insane amount of damage. So Luxus is definitely going to be the best choice. The only time when you may not want to use Luxus for the versatility team is actually because he's one of the few DPS in the magic faction right now. So when it's the magical week, I will actually recommend you using Luxus for the magical team. And then for the versatility team, you can probably use like Jalo or Razor or Biska. Biska is also very good for this game mode. I think if you have to rank them, I think Biska is probably the best, then followed by Razor. Because Biska has a lot more higher damage than Razor. Razor is still good because it's fast, but you can run around a lot easier to collect all those buffs. But Biska, just pure damage, I think that's a lot more better for Battle of Underworld. So yeah, so that's probably what I would recommend for the versatility team. Okay, now let me show you an actual clip of when I done Battle of Underworld King, just so you know exactly what to do when you are in the battle itself. So now when you're actually in the battle, like what I said earlier, you only want to use one DPS, put all of your energy stones, your best energy stone on that one single character. So, for example, if you don't have one set, then just remember to swap around your character depending on the team you are using. And that basically will maximize the amount of damage your DPS is able to deal out and just stick with your DPS throughout the entire battle. So in my case, I think I'm doing the physical team here, and I am using Nasu as my DPS. So you'll see I'm using Nasu throughout. One funny thing to know here is that even though my Jalo is actually better trained than Nasu, I think like Jalo has better skill levels and leadership skills upgraded more, etc. Because Nasu is more of a glass cannon and just more natural DPS, Nasu actually done more damage in general. So don't just focus always on your most trained up character. Focus more on the character who's like a DPS or glass cannon, as in they would typically do the most damage in Battle of Underworld. Okay, now when you start off the battle, basically what you do is that obviously you defeat the enemy to get some points, and you need to reach the point threshold to move on to the second phase. But there will also be some energy circle orbs flying around or just laying around on the floor, which when you get them, you get a buff for 15 seconds, and it will show you the number of times that can stack up. The maximum number of times it's going to stack up is 5 times. And the funny thing about this one is that whenever you get a new thing, so even for example you throw out there 5 stacks, when you get an extra one, it's not going to give you the 6 stat, you're going to be capped at 5. But what it does every single time when you collect a new one, regardless whether you have reached the maximum 5 or only at 1 stack, etc., is that whenever you collect it, you're going to refresh your cooldown. of the 15 second. So rather than going straight after all of the orbs for the buff, that's not actually the smartest idea. What you really want to do is you want to keep hold of those orbs on the floor and only collect them when your buff is about to end. So that will basically keep on refreshing the cooldown period for your buff to ensure that eventually you are always going to have 5 buff on you throughout the entire battle, and therefore you always do the highest amount of damage possible. Now at the very start you can choose to collect a few more, and the main thing here is that when you collect them you want to actually get it in a sense where your normal attack is able to kill off all the enemy, or just basically your attack is able to one-shot the enemy. So if you're struggling to do that, it doesn't hurt to collect one or two or maybe even all three very early on in the battle. But ideally you want to keep them on the field without collecting them, and only collect them to refresh kind of your cooldown. So let's see whether I'm going to collect this one. Right now I have 7 seconds left on this cooldown, for example. I'm going to collect it, and you can see now the stack went up to 2, but more importantly the cooldown refreshed back to 15. And that's the main thing you want to focus on, is that you always want your cooldown to be ready to be refreshed and never disappear. So you always have the maximum 5 stacks for majority of the battle. Okay, so now if we keep playing the clip, so you can see here, obviously my Nasu is pretty good generally, but you definitely basically want to be in a situation where you can kill off all of the small minions in one go. The fat guy that you just saw, that fat enemy, I think it's the only one you may need to take a few hits to kill them, which is fine. You can choose to use your skill attack there. It doesn't matter too much. What you can see here is that throughout the entire battle, I am leaving those buffs available until I really have to collect them. Sometimes because of the positioning of where they are in the battlefield, so for example, if I'm already on the right hand side, I know it will take me a long time to go back to the left hand side, then I may just choose to collect the buff straight away, so I don't need to keep running around towards them. I try to keep always one nearby to me so that I can keep an eye on the cooldown and just collect it when I need to. So yeah, so that's basically the thing you want to do for the first half of the battle, just to make sure you always, first of all, collect 5 stacks, and then make sure you always have the 5 stacks available. So for example here, you saw me just refreshing the cooldown. Now as the time limit about to pass on to the second stage, you definitely want to refresh it straight away, just before you enter the second half. I think I just missed it, but the reason is the buff on the second stage doesn't appear till at least 10 seconds in, so you kind of want the cooldown to match up perfectly. So I think I started off with 12 seconds, so yeah, so the buff only appeared like 8 seconds into the battle. So there is basically, I think this is the trickiest part of Battle for Underworld, is that you really want your buff cooldown to link up or transition from part 1 to part 2, and that kind of requires somehow you refresh your buff at the end of part 1, and then as soon as the buff appears in part 2 you go straight for them as soon as they appear. So now you can see I used my dash etc to collect them to refresh my cooldown back to 15 seconds, and basically always keep an eye on this. Do your attack, do your normal attack. When you see the cooldown about to finish, then just run towards them. And it's also a good idea to not be too far away from those buffs, so that you always are in kind of the running distance, to get them. Sometimes if you don't actually know where the buff is, just rotate around the angle when you're doing the attack to keep an eye out to see where's the next buff. So for example, now I can see there are 2 buffs here, so eventually, because I can see them, if the cooldown's about to finish, I know I can just run in that direction to collect them. So once again, you see I only have 4 seconds left there. Therefore, I make a dash to collect the buff, refresh it, and now I'm back to attacking. And you can't just repeat this throughout. Once again, I'll keep an eye out on this cooldown. 5 seconds left. I run to collect it, and then I go back and attack. And that's basically what you want to do. You want to get a very high score. Here, I'm very lucky. The buff actually spawned right next to me, so I don't need to worry too much. I don't need to run quite far, and that's quite good. So always keep an eye out on what is the closest buff to you. Then keep an eye on how long it is to left, and then always try to refresh it. So you always stack up that 5 stacks throughout the whole battle. And yeah, that's kind of how you can achieve a high score here.